We're probably live right now.
Yeah, we are live.
Every
time. I'm cool with it though. I like it. It's a good way to start.
We talked about this like the last 3 pods.
Yeah.
The soft launch, just have it already be rolling.
Cam just wants to get B-roll for Roger Berg. Episode 14, The Associates. We're back in Miami.
This one's a little rushed here.
I guess the last one we filmed was in Miami too. That's okay.
But
forget that.
We filmed Emon after the trip.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're still back in Miami in case you're wondering.
We have our good friend,
I would think so.
Mr. Drutang. Well, I was thinking of ways to describe you. I think it's a good place to start. Good friend, Mr. Drutang, on and I kind of want to understand how you describe yourself in 2 sentences. Like, how do you describe yourself and your internet persona and what you do?
Damn, that's a really good question.
You might want to bring your mic close.
Oh yeah, shit.
Or can you pick it up?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just pick it up.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, nice. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I'd say best way to describe myself, probably cult leader. I think, and cult is like it's kind of a loaded word, but anything that has a culture is a cult. So there's mainstream culture is a cult. It's just led by Kim Kardashian and fucking the Satanists in Hollywood. So I think that's to go into that a little deeper. I think most of the time, so I've been basically running the been full-time like Twitter influencing and really, I guess at the end of the day, I'm mostly an author. Writing is basically how I generate my my income and living. It's primarily the medium that I talk to the world through. Although getting into video and stuff like that is obviously it's something I'm looking into more, which is part of the reason I'm excited to be here.
What are you a cult leader of?
So that's a great question once again. But I just started this. I'm sure you guys have. Have you ever heard of a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization? So I just started Apocalypse DAO, and essentially it's the point of this organization, the goal of the DAO. So each DAO has some purpose that they're trying to accomplish, whether it be they'll pick out some purpose, and then the point of the DAO is that that group of people works towards completing the goal together, using blockchain and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. But with Apocalypse DAO, we have I've been working on this documentary for the last year or so with another Twitter conspiracy theorist. I'd say would be the accurate way to describe the niche. Nick Hinton. So I think we hung out when he was here. But anyway, so we've been working on a documentary, and the purpose of the DAO is to basically not only to produce the documentary in the best way possible, but then also to do kind of guerrilla social media networking or network promotion, stuff like that, which is kind of similar to the way that I'm sure you guys are familiar with the way that Tate recently got his stuff promoted, the flipping and having the kind of army behind that. But yeah, so there's that. And yeah, I guess to get to the message that's actually going to be portrayed in this documentary is basically all the research that I've been doing for the last few years has basically, I think what I'm most known for on Twitter and the internet in general is being able to see trends coming before they happen. For instance, one of my biggest tweets was calling out in October of 2019, before coronavirus even existed. I called out that there was max 100% vaccination. I don't know. Are you guys gonna get is there any words I shouldn't say on here? No?
We can always cut things out. You're good.
Okay, dope.
I remember this tweet, by the way.
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember it vividly.
Yeah. I think the tweet was, imagine a world with 100% vaccination required for global travel, schooling, and education, or, something else in there.
I
But
think it was commerce, maybe.
yeah, something like that. And, or employment. But anyways, so that was the tweet. And yeah, so it was a month before they even ran Event 201, which is like the simulation for coronavirus. Are you guys familiar with Event 201? So that's the Gates Foundation funded global coronavirus pandemic simulation that they ran in October of 2019. But anyway, so that was one of the tweets. So that type of thing, that type of prediction before things happen is kind of, I would say, the most important part of my brand, and is kind of the message that we're looking to portray in the documentary through Apocalypse Now is it's on that same vein. So it's basically what I think is coming next as far as the global narrative.
Got you.
So I look at this pod with you, and it's really interesting to me because it was like episode 6 or 7 where Nick and I just sat down and basically like started talking about some of our more functioning schizophrenic viewpoints.
Who runs
right?
the world,
and
how things work, actually,
like
that type of stuff.
Like what things behind the scenes are pulling strings. And we actually mentioned you in that pod, like I understand these things and I've like read it, but I haven't researched it, right? And whenever I think of you, I always think of someone that like this stuff. You read it. You have like very tangible facts and places and events that you can reference, and that's always how I kind of like. If someone would ask me who is Drutang, I'd be like, oh, he knows everything about the cabal, like just everything. And so that's kind of how I look at this episode. It's like a follow-up to that, except now we have Drutang here who actually has the facts.
Yeah, that's definitely something like in the conspiracy sphere. Like, I think that's one of the things that I really specialize in. Is like a lot of people like, they'll make a conspiracy thread about something, and it'll be something like fucking something about aliens and Venus and like all this like shit that's like not backed up whatsoever, and it's like all hearsay. And their references are like another conspiracy theorist YouTuber that just made a video, and they're just referencing the video. But I think what I specialize is bringing the receipts, and like where there's some intuitive things, like everybody knows, like deep down, you look at Bill Gates and you're like, this is an evil fucking nerd who talks about wanting to depopulate the earth by any means necessary. And you're like, okay, this guy is not good, but like it's hard to put your finger on exactly why. And, the people who have fallen for his, multi-billion-dollar, philanthropist branding, they're not going to be convinced by, the intuitive, where some people can, have common sense and know that the richest man or previously the richest man in the world probably has some alternative motives that might not be good. I specialize in bringing the receipts.
So
I think you can look at Bill Gates' physique and discredit his philanthropy. I don't want him spreading his ideas.
Yeah, the man tits really rough on him.
So I have a question on that topic, and then I want to talk more about receipts about different events. I just kind of want to like maybe name a couple events and just see what comes off the top of your head.
Sweet.
Because I think it'll be very different than most. But on the Gates thing, and I like to ask people this: do you think that it's on accident? It's just kind of like whatever. It's just like based on things that are happening that are bad throughout the world are happening because of incompetence, or are things planned to a T?
So at the end of the day, I think that's really the core question in all of the conspiracy realm is there, and that's, what is it? Occam's razor is what people always refer to. Like the most logical explanation is usually it, and there's, you shouldn't you shouldn't assume malice in what could just be like stupidity or whatever. But I think like what we've already talked about in this podcast, for instance, the Event 201, when you watch the Event 201, I know you guys know about it, but if you watch the actual, they filmed the whole thing. They filmed this whole simulation. And when you watch it, you can see them go through each stage of this, of the process that played out over the next 2 years after they posted that. Because basically they did the simulation, then coronavirus came around in November in China, first case was in January in the US, and then lockdowns were in March. And it basically goes through everything, lockdowns, and even it goes through censorship, how they plan to combat people with alternative narratives to what they were going to put forward. Gotcha. So there's definitely a planned aspect with that. Like, that's just, it's pretty undeniable. You could say, well, they were just preparing for a potential one, but then when you look into, for instance, how as time goes on, you remember originally when you said the Wuhan lab saying that coronavirus originated there was a bannable offense on Facebook and YouTube. Mm-hmm. Now, only 2 years later, they're finally having to admit that, yeah, this is looking like, if not as likely as a natural occurrence, more likely. And that's like even Dr. Fauci admits that now. You can kind of see, well, and that research was funded by the NIH, which is the organization that Dr. Fauci is the leader of. And not only that, the mRNA technology for the vaccines was also it's Moderna or Pfizer is what people think came up with it. But in reality, the NIH actually, that was all government technology. They had been funding all the research, and the NIH actually sued Moderna for that technology to try and get even more like kickbacks for it. So that's one aspect as far as planning it, but there's also, there is a chaos aspect, which is, we'll be going into this, I'm sure, later. There are these, for instance, with predictive programming, which I'm sure is going to come up soon, which is kind of like Event 201, but specifically more like in movies. So for instance, the movie Contagion, which came out in, I believe it was 2011. Have you guys seen that movie?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if you watch that movie, again, they have everything. They have lockdowns, they have masks, they even have vaccine passports to like get into malls and whatnot. And in that movie, they also have conspiracy theorists saying it was made in a lab and it was a bioweapon as opposed to a natural occurrence. Of course, in the movie, it was a natural occurrence. So recently, what makes it really obvious is that there was a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information request to the government where they wanted to see how much involvement the CDC had with making this movie. And it turns out the CDC was not only given millions of dollars, but was telling them the script that they wanted to put in. And then once that movie came out, they used it in Congress. They used the impact culturally that movie had. They used that as a excuse in Congress to give the CDC the amount of funding needed for them to take over the government basically during the pandemic.
So would you say it's there's a lot. Would you say it's entirely planned, or would you say it's a mix?
So I would say there is a mix because to get into the predictive programming part, for instance, there's this, I talk about, for anybody who follows me on Twitter, I'll talk about predictive programming in Marvel Comics and how that kind of relates to conditioning the public to accept not only the characters, but the events of what's happening in like mainstream media and history and the narrative they want you to subscribe to. There's this comic book author named Alan Moore, and he makes comics. He wrote V for Vendetta. Have you guys seen that movie? That's another one that's like basically spot on predictive programming. It was set around 2020, and in the movie you find out that this pandemic that they have in the movie, one of the main plot points, was actually a government-created bioweapon that they used to gain more authoritarian control. But Alan Moore wrote the comic that movie's based off of, and he himself, outwardly says, I'm a chaos magician. He says, I'm doing my art because art influences the mass consciousness through pop culture, you can by putting that art out there, you can influence the way that events play out.
Okay.
And he like outwardly says it. So there's an aspect to it. It's like simultaneously both. It's like him putting out V for Vendetta didn't necessarily, put these things into action.
It wasn't planned in unison with the government. Probably.
There's some aspects. It's really kind of impossible to tell how much like coordination there was, but the fact that he put that stuff out did influence like how people reacted to it at the very least. So it's hard to tell, but there is a connection. So it's almost, there's a phrase which some people, this is like this is pretty like well known in conspiracy theories, this phrase order out of chaos, which is like ordo seclorum, some shit, and it's used,
like the serpents, right?
It's
Ouroboros.
Yeah,
Is that different?
Yeah, Ouroboros is that's a snake eating itself. They may use that phrase like in a symbol with that. I'm not sure. I haven't seen that,
okay.
But it's definitely, they usually have a two-headed eagle facing each way, and they put that underneath. But so order out of chaos, you create a situation, you create chaos, and then when people are afraid, then you can influence
provide
a
solution.
Yeah, and it's also referred to as the Hegelian dialectic. But
so I have like a couple events off the top of my head, and Logan, jump in with me.
Okay. So I want to ask him, like, so we talked about like this planning and shit like that, and so there is an orchestrated level of planning that goes into these, mass consciousness, government intervention, sort of nefarious plots. Mm-hmm. So who's planning them? Who?
Okay, that's a good question.
Who is the, like we mentioned the NIH,
mm-hmm.
right? But this is something that I know. It just obviously.
But who controls the NIH?
Yeah, like I've read a lot
mm-hmm.
of your content, so I kind of know. But I would love to kind of discuss it in more in depth.
And in my opinion, I think Logan's opinion too. I think based on what we discussed in episode 6 or 7, whatever it was,
mm-hmm.
it's not anybody that's like public facing. Like
mm-hmm.
it's not Fauci. It's not Trump. Like there's somebody. It's not Biden, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's other people, or there's something there.
No, Biden's controlled by the ice cream companies.
Big ice cream.
There's something there, right? So like, who is it? What is it?
So yeah, that's another great question. You guys are really hitting like all the like top conspiracy questions that like anytime you bring up like a conspiracy theory to someone, those are always the objections. Like, oh, it's just random, and oh, who is they? Is a common question.
I think it's like we kind of know, but I want to know what you think and how you would describe it to somebody
mm-hmm.
that comes up to you on the street.
I want
and
the
says,
associates of the associates to hear the long form real answer.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, no, fantastic question. So to get to like who they are, there's this basically throughout all of recorded history. So I'm talking go back to ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
There was always a higher, what made you higher class, what really gave you power was knowledge. And it's kind of the same way today. Higher education will lead you to, having a better life for in some aspects. But back then, it was only the ruling class that was getting educated. Yeah. So it was only the most powerful people that were getting this esoteric knowledge.
And education looked much different.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And it was always, it was more of a apprenticeship basis. So you could think of, this we'll might get into this further about how much predictive programming there is in Star Wars, but it was kind of a similar setup to, there was an apprentice master type thing.
Never seen Star Wars.
But oh, nice. Well, you missed a lot of their programming, so that could be good for you.
I also have seen like one of them personally. He's memeing the Tate thing. He's memeing the Tate thing.
Oh yeah, keep your movies. What color is your Bugatti? Yeah. So anyways, that's basically the power structure. It's always been not only the richest, but how they stay rich is their not only the knowledge but the network. So there's always been compartmentalization in the power structure of all these civilizations. So
is it the same families, same bloodlines?
Is
that what you're getting at?
There is, yeah. there is that is a huge part of it. They're obsessed with eugenics. They're obsessed with
Who are these families?
Their own bloodlines. So there's a book called Bloodlines of the Illuminati,
And it's on the CIA website.
Yeah.
I've read through some of that.
Okay.
That's crazy. That's on the CIA website to me. Anyway.
Yeah, they have like any really all the good shit they have on there, which is hilarious. And just like as far as conspiracy theory, it's always so funny when people like act like so many things are just so out of like, for instance, Operation Northwoods, which is a declassified operation where the CIA wanted to do actually a terrorist attack in Miami to get the U.S. To invade Cuba. They wanted to do a false flag, plant explosives, possibly kill people in Miami to get the U.S. to go to war with Cuba. So anyways, I'm just saying the declassified stuff is where you, it's like just undeniable fact.
Yeah, it's like blatant.
Mm-hmm. So I guess to go back to the main question though, as far as who they are, it's these upper echelons of these educational circles. So they have this esoteric knowledge. So, which actually most of it goes back to Egypt itself. Like there's really been no, for instance, the Freemasons, which is what everybody thinks of.
Yep.
They think of themselves. They think of their first Mason. The first Freemason was Hiram Abiff, who built Solomon's Temple, which was the first like great temple of Judaism. And even before that, they say he was like a reincarnation of Osiris, which is an Egyptian god. But basically, the Freemasonry, that group, to go into like how it's like compartmentalized based on knowledge, is Freemasonry started off as a stonemasons guild. So it was the people who could build buildings, the cathedrals. Mm-hmm. So that power, like that knowledge of mathematics to actually build something, is what gave them the power to basically control civilization. Because the cathedrals themselves was so integral into maintaining the dominance of religion. Because if you bring in peasants from the countryside and they see this crazy cathedral, which it's almost unbelievable that they could build that at that time in the Dark Ages. And why it was called the Dark Ages, because there was no science outside of those very limited groups that still had access to the information of the old world of Rome, Greece, and Egypt. So to go to, just to give you a really good example of one group specifically, which is hugely behind, for instance, the pandemic, is the Jesuits. So the Jesuits themselves, they were founded by a guy who was converted from Judaism by force, basically, during the Inquisition. So he was a Jew. I believe it was, I'm not sure which country he was in, to be honest, but he basically, you could either leave the country, you leave Europe or under the Holy Roman Empire, or you get converted, or there was a lot of torturing and stuff like that as well. But anyways, this sect of Catholicism, the Jesuits, they're kind of their own secret society within the Roman Catholic Church. And before, they were always barred from seeking the papacy, from becoming pope, up until our current pope right now, which is Francis. He was the first ever Jesuit pope.
Okay.
So that should raise some alarms to you. And then also Benedict, who stepped down right before him, that was the first pope to step down before death in several centuries. So it was highly unprecedented what happened. So that's one example. So we have him controlling, the largest religion. Then we have Fauci, who was trained in a Jesuit school.
And let me ask,
and Trump was
does that
also
look like
trained
a
in
transition
Jesuit
of power or something? In like to you, right? Someone that's researched everything. Does that look like a transition of power to a degree?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely,
When was that pope, or when was our current pope brought in?
I think it was, I want to say 2012, 13 to like 14 maybe.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure.
That feels about right when the timeline started shifting. You know,
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
from
No,
like normal world to like clown world. I don't know. It's about that time.
yeah, 16 was, yeah,
So I
definitely.
mean, 16 for sure, but
That's a really interesting thing to bring up as well, which because 2016 was actually important with the Georgia Guidestones, which just blew up recently. But there was a notch cut out. If you looked at the main Georgia Guidestone, that's written in English because it was written in like 8 different languages, all the different stones. The one that was written in English, in the upper right-hand corner, there was a notch cut out of it, like a cube shape, and it was knocked out. And then I believe it was 9/11/2011, I want to say, or 2009. It was knocked out. It was empty for a few days, so people noticed that and was like, "Who did that?" Then there was a new cube inserted, and on the cube it had this date. I want to say it was like 8/14/16, and then an M on the other side. But if you read it backwards, so it was like if you turned it like clockwise, it would read. It was like 14/8. I forget exactly what, but anyways, it referenced the date in 2016 as which is basically a symbol of like a turning point, which is kind of like what the Guidestones were.
Are you familiar? And I know we kind of got off track from the answer of like who is they.
Yeah.
Do you want to answer that real quick before I ask this question?
Okay.
Yeah,
Because my question is based on 2016 and like timelines and stuff.
Okay. So just to get back to the who is they thing.
Yeah, let's sum it up.
So to give you a really good modern example is that Trump was trained went to a Jesuit high school. Fauci always talks about his Jesuit training, and then we have our first Jesuit pope. So 3 of the most powerful men during the pandemic, the man running the biggest religion, the man running the most powerful superpower, and the man running specifically the organization that not only funded the development of the virus, but also we talked about problem and solution, but also funded the mRNA technology that was given as the solution. So that gives you an idea of who exactly, like one example of like one of those groups that coordinate into ruling the world. And just one other thing I want to say is Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati, which is what everyone talks about when you say Illuminati. What people are referring to is the Bavarian Illuminati. And they were founded in 1776, same year as the U.S. was founded. But Adam Weishaupt, the guy who founded that, was also a Jesuit. So that like the plan that they executed is an example of what the Bavarian Illuminati was
Jesuits,
looking to do.
but it's like the ones behind the scenes that
So-
kind of run things and kind of pull strings is what you're saying.
And so to give you another example of how these groups are like,
So
it's not all one group. It's a bunch of groups working together. Who he founded the Bavarian Illuminati with was the Rothschild central bankers, which any conspiracy theorist guy would know that name well. They basically set up all the central banking system in Europe. The patriarch had 5 sons and spread them out among the different European countries, and then they worked together to basically take over the banking system. And then then there was a third guy, Jacob Frank, who ran this cult called Sabbatean Frankism, which is basically Saturn worshipers. And they basically do exactly the opposite of everything. As far as morality in the Old Testament, they do the exact opposite. Is basically they're all about inversion. But those 3 founded the Bavarian Illuminati. So I think that's probably the best example of the question
and
there.
they're connected to the bloodlines that are kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah.
How so?
So, for instance, if you want to go Trump specifically, so every U.S. president has been related to each other, including Obama. They've all
It
was like some middle school girl in like 2010 that did a school project to like trace back all the lineage. But so that's one example. It really a lot of it goes back to
Go to
like
the
the beginning of
CIA
civilization.
website and read the 13 Bloodlines of the Illuminati, and you'll understand.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That would do pretty accurate. Yeah.
Cool. I want to talk about 2016 because there's a conspiracy theory where there's like a timeline shift, or the like timelines converge, and there's like a lot of people experience like the Mandela effect or whatever. And are you familiar with like what the Looking Glass conspiracy is?
Is it really like referring to Project Looking Glass?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it had to do with that.
Briefly.
I want to know if you knew anything about that, because you mentioned 2016 as like a turning point.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of people mention 2016 as where like different timelines converge or whatever in different realities, and it kind of puts us on this one that we're currently on, which is like one of chaos and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of familiar with the concept of Project Looking Glass. It's basically, to my understanding, it's essentially using, and this is one of the projects which, like, it's not something necessarily that I would bring up as like hard evidence, just because it's more on the hearsay spectrum as opposed to things that are like declassified actual CIA documents that can be backed up really easily. But to my knowledge, is basically you have, it was basically like a CIA experiment where you have one guy sit in this chair. I think they said it was like alien technology, and then he can see possible timelines. And then they would try to in order to control the future, they would try to adjust, what they're doing to control it. Like I said, I had looked into it a little bit and wasn't able to find like hard evidence. I think that's one of the ones where it's like more like whistleblowers, which is hard to trust, because if you're the CIA and you want people to think a certain thing, then you could you could double fake them out and like have a whistleblower or whatever. But it is compelling, and I think 2016, just to go into back to that the Georgia Guidestones thing I was talking about. In the Georgia Guidestones, like on the plaque, which is basically the only public information they really gave to describe what was going on with it, they mention things being played. They mention what do they call it? A time capsule or whatever being placed there, and people are always like, "Oh, it was," and it says like buried here, blah blah blah. But they dug that up, and there was no time capsule. So what I interpret that as, and there's also some other documents. There was an investigation documentary in 2015 called Dark Skies over Elberton. Elberton, Georgia is basically where the Guidestones were built. The Freemasons of Elberton, Georgia built it. But there were some documents at Goggins Industries, which was the corporation that was contracted to build the Guidestones. And in those documents, it mentions that there's supposed to be markers placed there. There's supposed to be things placed on the Guidestones at certain times, that they gave like the times in the documents telling people when to do it. So that cube I was talking about, and you can look this up and see pictures of the cube. It's in one of my threads. That date on there in 2016, I believe it is August 14, 2016. That date is actually, it's this holiday. It's not technically a holiday. It's more of a day of like solemn commemoration, in the same way that 9/11 isn't a holiday in the U.S. It's a day that we commemorate the falling of the two towers. Mm-hmm. That date, August 14th, 2016, is the day in the Jewish calendar that's known as the 9th of Av, which is the 9th day of the 11th month in the Jewish calendar. So in the same way that 9/11 is the 11th day of our 9th month, the 9th of Av is the 9th day of their 11th month. So it's like the inverse. I was talking about the Sabbatean Frankists, and how they invert everything. So that date is actually, it changes in the Western calendar. So, I said August 14, 2016. The 9th of Av is not always on August 14th, 2016, if we were to describe it in our Western calendar.
Okay.
So what's really interesting about that date, the reason that's a solemn day of commemoration in Judaism is that it's the day they commemorate the falling of their 2 temples. So you remember how I mentioned that the first Mason built Solomon's temple, which was the first temple? They built another one during the Roman era, and the Romans, it was actually destroyed in the Roman-Jewish Civil War. That day, the 9th of Av, is the day that they commemorate the falling of these two temples. So they commemorate the falling of 2 temples on the 11th of their 9th, or 9th of their 11th month. We follow the falling of the 2 towers on the 11th of our 9th month. So it's the direct inverse. And so that date being pointed out in the guide stones, and this is something that I don't think I've actually seen anybody else bring up this, because it was such a weird, nobody could really, the only people who followed this was some weirdo that lived in Elberton, Georgia, and he saw the cube get put up, and then they smashed it right after, but he really couldn't figure out what the fuck was going on. So this is only something I put together just by chance, doing all this other research. But what's really interesting about that 9th of Av date is that's also, Jeffrey Epstein was found, he was killed on the night of the 9th of Av, 2018 or 17? I forget when he was killed.
Was he actually killed?
It really is not, it's really hard to tell because they showed one picture of him getting dragged off or whatever. It could have been a body double. They have no video footage. Yep. So it's really not, it's kind of like the question of, were there actually planes that hit the Twin Towers at all, or was it just explosives and the planes were CGI? That's the type of stuff that I don't get caught up in too much, because it really could be either way and it doesn't really matter. The most important part is the symbolism behind it.
Right.
So just to go to the 9th of Av thing, what was also interesting is right before, 2 weeks before Epstein was killed, they released Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Did you guys see that movie?
No.
It was the one with...
but I heard it. It was
Leo,
promoted pretty heavy.
Leo and not Cruz, but who's the other dude? I forget. Anyway, star-studded film. It was a how do you say this guy's name? Quentin Tarantino or whatever. Mm-hmm. Hit the only movie that man made without Harvey Weinstein as executive producer, because Weinstein was already in jail. That Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was that. And in that movie, the climax of the film it's like semi-based on a true story. It's about the Manson attacks. And basically, the Manson, he was another cult leader, fellow cult leader. Not one of my favorite cults, though. And he basically, that night of the attack in the movie, and they specifically, they make sure you know what the date is. They flash it on the screen. It's the 9th of Av. They make sure you know it's the 9th of Av in the movie.
Gotcha.
So... and that came out 2 weeks before the Epstein death. So that's another example of how Hollywood and these groups are all colluding, and they leave a trail.
Clues. Yeah. And let's talk about that, right? Because that's a part of the karmic debt cycle, right? Is that as long as these things are shown, then it's not an issue morally for them, right? As long as you
they so believe it.
Or that's a part of the theology of the Bavarian Franks, or the
Sabbatean Frankists, Barbarian Illuminati.
All these people who are kind of pulling strings. That's a key thing, right?
Yes. So specifically, I was talking about it. It all goes back to these same esoteric principles since ancient Egypt. There's this book called the Kabbalion, because basically all these texts still to this day. We know of, basically, they call it Hermeticism, is the phrase they use to describe this esoteric doctrine. And
I've read, what's the book? I've read the Kabbalion
Principles by the three initiates, right? So that book,
great book.
Yeah, that book.
I think I ordered it and then they canceled on me.
Oh, really? Wow, they don't want you to know.
I think it was Amazon or something.
They don't want you to know. But yeah, so that book is basically, it's based on the Hermetic philosophy. Hermes is the Greek god of knowledge based on the Egyptian god Thoth. And basically that is the title, if you want to, it's the most accurate title to describe the overall esoteric theology and science in some ways, alchemy essentially, of these ruling class people. So in the Kabbalion, it was written anonymously. They kind of have it nailed down to who actually wrote it. And the dude, it's questionable if he had like really good access to information or not. But the idea is we only have, as far as ancient documents that talk about Hermeticism, there's these, it's called the Hermeticum. It's a collection of, I believe it's only 14 documents, 24, I forget. But it's a collection of documents which describe the Hermetic philosophy. But in what people say is that in the secret societies, they have access to much more. That's been passed down in personal libraries throughout time. In the Kabbalion specifically, it talks about how karma operates. And there's they describe it as there being two planes that karma operates. There's the conscious level and the subconscious level. So they say the goal of becoming a trained hermeticist, becoming a master of this, is to learn how to separate between the conscious and subconscious karmic swings. So it's basically, if you have a bunch of pleasure, then eventually the karmic swing would give you pain, unless you can learn to master this duality separation. So basically, by subconsciously influencing people through the predictive programming, then they dodge the swing back. They can get all the advantage out of the event, but they dodge the backswing, and it just hurts all the people who they were like actually getting the benefit from originally.
And they use predictive programming to do so.
Exactly, and that goes back to it's chaos magic. It's just like Alan Moore.
They tell you it's coming, right? And then they are freed of that karmic debt when they actually do it because they already told you.
And
they tell you it's coming so that they can reap the pleasure of it while you reap the pain of it, so that it's equally balanced.
That's just what I said, but just a different way.
That's beautiful.
Really,
that's a good way of explaining as well. And to go into that more, goes back to that question of, is everything planned or is it all chaos? Because, specifically they call it chaos magic. And predictive programming has a few different ways. In one way, it's a taunt. It's that karmic thing. They tell you what they're going to do before they do it. For instance, Fight Club comes out in 1999, where the end of the movie is them looking out at two towers in a controlled demolition. And then that's basically the scene you get on 9/11. And the guy who wrote that was also a chaos magician. They're a part of this group called the Discordian Society. But anyways, that's a whole different thing. But there's another aspect where there's the predictive programming like Contagion, where you put that out and that just gets people, the more you present a situation to people, the more comfortable they become with it, and the more predictively they'll react to it.
Subconsciously.
Yeah. So when they see a pandemic happen in real life, all these people now in lockdown at home, what are they doing? They're watching Netflix, and what's on Netflix? Contagion. They'll watch Contagion again. This is just what's happening. Dope, Matt Damon is showing me that it's cool to get a vax passport. This is so dope. This is Dr. Fauci, he's right. And the Dr. Fauci character in there is a black guy that gets attacked, and it's a total oh my God, he's just a good guy, and all these people are hating him. All these bad conspiracy theorists, they're saying he made it in a lab. So yeah, there's multiple levels to it where sometimes it's like a subtle nod, like, hey, we're about to fucking do this shit. And then other times it's like very specific, like Contagion, where they just lay it out. Marvel is the most powerful out of all of them. which we can go into.
So I want to. So that's an interesting thing. I have a few questions, right? And I'll give you a few options of where we can take this. This discussion. So my first question is, we could either talk about what other sort of tools, because I think it's good that people foster an awareness. If maybe they're watching this because they like content marketing and they watch the Associates, they're trying to build a business. I think it's good that people understand these things, because I think it gives them a little bit more agency as they go about their own life and improving their own life. If they have an understanding, it's like you just feel a little bit more comfortable when something crazy happens, like coronavirus, for example, where a lot of people are freaking out. I feel like people within sort of our echo chamber are more composed, maybe to some extent, or not. Maybe it really.
I think so,
but I think so too in general. So we could either talk about that.
Entrepreneurs are independent minded, so yeah.
Or I would love for you to kind of project forward then, if you have this predictive programming, what's next based on your pattern recognition.
Right, and I'd also love to talk about why they even do all of this stuff. Why can't we just live peacefully, right? Why? I think we have some ideas, but I want to hear from you. Okay. And then I also, at the end, I want to just name events. 1913, JFK, 1971. I just want to hear a splurge of your thoughts out.
Okay,
after that.
Sweet.
So where do you want to start?
So I think that's another. It's just beautiful how you got the bullet points. Fantastic questions, because again, what drives these people to do evil things?
Is it money? Is it power? Is it something else? Are they controlled by?
So there's this philosopher, Alan Watts, who I believe he died in the 90s, but he was doing his lecture. He does lectures. He was a Presbyterian minister who then traveled to Asia and studied with Zen monks, and he has these lectures that go deep into philosophy, and they combine Western and Eastern. Anyways, he talks on that same vein of why they do this evil. He has a fun thought experiment which he presents in one of his lectures, where he says, imagine you could have anything you want instantly. Anything you want, you can have it instantly. Any pleasure, orgies, feast. Anything.
You don't have to work for anything.
Yeah. It's just snap your fingers and you have it. That is hell. How quickly would you get so bored of everything that the only thing that would bring you any pleasure or novelty would just be pain? It would be pain, torture. You'd want things
Torture on themselves or torturing others and pain on others?
Both.
Okay.
Because, people are into, BDSM type shit, like whipping and like Wolf of Wall Street. He's getting whipped and dominatrix type shit. So that's basically
Wolf of Wall Street?
Depravity. Huh? That scene in that movie?
I don't remember the scene, but I've watched the movie.
Okay. Sure. You remember where he's getting woofy? He's like getting,
yeah.
I think it's at the very beginning.
Out of snorting the cocaine out of it.
Yeah, I think, off her ass or whatever. Great scene, but it's predictive programming, Wolf of Wall Street. What does it mean? It
means the Jesuits want you to get rich.
Bastards. That's that thought experiment of there's always duality in life. That's what the yin and yang symbol represents. Is that there's always going to be evil. It's inescapable. Even when you create a society, you can see it in the psychology of the modern Westerner, upper middle class white girl. They have everything handed to them. They don't even really need to work, to be honest. They could skate by on whatever. They have everything handed to them, Uber Eats, everything. But they will create problems. They will find a reason to be depressed. They will find, and some of them are good reasons, because it is. When you get to a level of opulence and convenience, there is it takes part of your soul. There's not you don't get the pleasure of working for something, etc. But that's one conceptual way of looking at that as far as why they do evil. It's because and specifically talking about the ruling class is once you can have anything you want with money, anything money can buy, then you'd want things that money can't buy. You need absolute power, human trafficking, again, torture, human sacrifice, which is actually, that's another thing too, is like all this stuff, again, is not new. All these secret societies and whatever, they go back to the earliest recorded history, and to go in, they've always, the ruling class has always done human sacrifices as well, and shit like that. So it's always been around. And then what was the second part of that question? Oh, events, like in history?
I think we come back to that near the end. I think the next thing is really talking about what do you think comes next? Where we're at. I mean, 2016 was like a significant date. And we had the whole Trump election era, and then the lockdowns and stuff like that, and we see this big power shift in the Vatican and whatever.
Sure.
But what is coming next, in your opinion?
I always before he gives his answer, I always think about, I think it was like Black Ops 2, perhaps, where it was it's like set in 2024. It was Black Ops 2 or 3, and it was like the Cold War set in 2024 or 2025, and it was like obviously Russia, U.S. It's just super funny to think back on, predict like some of these rhetoric devices that the ruling class will say uses to sort of infiltrate mass consciousness.
Yeah.
What if that was it?
Yeah, no,
now we've got
like Call of Duty games, hugely impacted culture, and like great recruiting tool for the military, and keeping the wars going. But yeah, that's I mean that. Okay.
So what comes next?
Yeah,
what comes,
I have a couple
opinion?
of things that come to my mind. Is big switch in the financial system. We see like obviously the stuff with Russia, China, all that, but it seems like power in the financial system is
de-dollarization.
Is being flipped from the U.S. to these other countries, and I also think that brings probably war to a certain degree, depending on what happens, because it's a big power flip. So I want to really know where you see the next, and also just control. We have the social media now. We have the phones. The passes are on your phones. That type of thing. What's included in the next 10 years, 20 years, 50 years?
Okay, so to go from the launch pad of I guess 2016. I mean, that was the election of 2016. So to go to like what was happening then as like a big initiation phase, because basically, as far as the guidestones, that was the one marker they ever did, the one thing they ever did with it, and that was 36 years after it was erected. So it's pretty important like time frame. That was is basically debates. It was debates going on between Hillary and Trump, basically. Well, actually, I think it might have been the primary season still. But it was basically setting up the battle between Hillary and Trump, which kind of polarized the country way more than like previous elections, for sure. But I guess as far as like what's coming up in the future, I guess I'll just focus on that. So one of the reasons, or really the next thing coming up here is, and this is something that during the pandemic you may have noticed, I believe it was late in 2020, near the end of the first year, that you may have noticed Fauci, Biden, and he said this in 2021 as well, but they would just keep repeating this phrase over and over again. They'd always say, dark winter, dark winter, dark winter, dark winter. Fauci said, and you could just Google dark winter, and there's a bunch of articles. Fauci says dark winter's coming. Biden, dark winter.
Are those tied in with like the Build Back Better thing and the reset or something? I forgot what.
Great Reset.
Yeah.
Yep. It's all, and if you want to point to that, I guess this should have been part of my answer for the who's the real ruling class type thing, is the World Economic Forum is hugely influential. If you want to, it's like not even, it's so outrageous at this point that it's not even a conspiracy theory, because you can literally just, Klaus Schwab, the leader of the World Economic Forum, literally just wrote a book called The Great Reset. So when people are like, oh, the Great Reset conspiracy theory, it's like, it's not a conspiracy theory. He wrote a book publicly, and they're telling you exactly what they want to do, which is, basically centralized power. So the ruling class are the only people that get to have any type of like normalcy and freedom, and the rest of the population is left to fucking not own anything ever, rent your entire life, work remote on some soy job, and never fucking and eat a ton of soy, fucking
And the bugs.
transition and fucking
The bugs.
just
too.
like extreme. Just really, it goes back to the eugenics thing. Is they actually want the lower class to look completely different than the upper class. And if you notice, Kim Kardashian took out all of her implants recently because it became BBLs and fake tits became like a lower class thing because it became accessible. So it no longer, they're literally morphing how people look. But anyways, Dark Winter. So if you want to get my like best answer for what's coming next, is Dark Winter. So they kept repeating this phrase over and over again, Dark Winter, Dark Winter, Dark Winter. So the question is, what the hell is Dark Winter? Look it up. It was in the same way that we were just talking about Event 201, which was a simulation of the global coronavirus pandemic. In 2001, there was a military simulation called Dark Winter, and it was basically a situation, it was a simulation of a bioterrorist attack using a modified version of smallpox to cause economic collapse and a dark winter, cause like a total, a great a collapse of civilization and poverty, strife, etc. So if you noticed, the reason that Biden still has emergency powers to where he can basically at any time, they're not really doing anything with coronavirus right now as far as like doing new health mandates and whatever, but they still have all that power, which unprecedented power. It's like basically those are invented for war times. That was the only reason governments are supposed to have these emergency powers. He used monkeypox to extend that, because basically coronavirus had died down. And if you notice, as soon as he declared that health emergency to give him more emergency powers, have you heard about monkeypox since? Nothing. It's dropped off. So
I also don't watch the news. So
oh, okay. Nice. Well, that's great. That's why you are where you are in life, because you don't waste your time with this shit. But yeah. Anyways, so yeah, basically that's showing directly, like, they talked about it for like a year. They said Dark Winter for a year before coming out with the little smallpox variant. And at the same time that monkeypox was around, it was revealed that there were biolabs in Ukraine, which the Russians had taken control of, and said that the U.S. was using them to create bioweapons.
Wasn't that like part of the narrative for the Ukraine, like the Russia invading Ukraine? I saw something about them taking over biolabs and they're bombing cities with biolabs or something.
Yeah, it could very well have been one of their main objectives. It's definitely something that they specifically talked about, and then the U.S. denied for a while, and then later there's actually a congressional hearing you could watch where they questioned one of the U.S. health officials and was like, hey, do we have biolabs in the Ukraine? She's like, yeah, we do, and we're scared that Russia could take control of it and use it. But then in the news, they just say, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. Basically, the semantics they use is that, oh, it was just bio-research. We weren't making weapons. We were just experimenting with undisclosed different bioagents. But anyways, whether or not monkeypox was, a bioweapon, it's just those markers are, again, it fits in with the predictive programming thing, the simulation. And now, because of Ukraine, back when they first started saying Dark Winter, it was like, okay, like things are bad during the pandemic. Lockdowns were interrupting the supply line or whatever. But until they really kicked up the Ukraine thing and like Russia stopped giving out energy to Europe, and now especially recently with the Nord Stream pipeline getting blown up, now they don't even have the option of turning it back on in the winter where Europe is going to freeze. They don't really need power that much during the summer. They don't even have AC because it barely gets hot because of their altitude, or their, latitude, I think. But in the winter, those MFs are gonna freeze. Like they are done for.
You can swear on here, by the way.
It's already fucked. So they are going to have a dark winter, and it's not to say that the U.S. is going to be exempt from it. We're looking at extreme amounts of inflation, which is high. Was it 8.3% or something last month? Highest rate since the 70s, and we're looking at a very similar dark winter. Like once it gets anywhere except Miami, they're going to be all fucked.
So how much longer do you think, you talk about inflation, how much longer do you think it goes on before it just blows up in our faces?
So that leads to the next part of the plan. So we move on to the next simulation, which is like once you go through all this stuff, like, and again, if you're not making your living off of this, you should just not pay attention to it whatsoever. Like, just don't watch the news is honestly the best way to do it. But for me, once you're in this deep, you can just look at these simulations and they'll tell you exactly what they're going to do. So dark winter, that's basically in the bag. That's happening. That's going to be this winter. Next is a little simulation they call Cyber Polygon, which they actually ran with the Russians. The West and Russia co-ran this simulation. I believe it was in the summer of 2021. Cyber Polygon is basically, it's a simulation of a cyber attack causing a global financial collapse. So, as you know, money is going extremely digital. And the money that we use, bank accounts, it's not nearly as secure as, say, Bitcoin or something like that, where there's a shared ledger, where you can make sure that no one's printing billions, which they have been with the dollar. And basically it all relies on these different banks, like actually keeping track of their shit. And they themselves are loaning out money they don't have.
Yep.
So anyways, a cyber attack, once the inflation gets bad enough, and what's funny is, even though the U.S. dollar is not backed by anything, been off the gold standard since 1971, we just printed, I think at least I've seen different estimates, but at a minimum, like we added an additional 30% of the supply on top of what was existing, if not doubled.
I've seen 50%, I think.
I'm just giving the lowball estimate there. Yeah. But they actually stopped telling us how much they were printing too.
And
so
for reference, like the banks in 2008 that got bailed out were hundreds of billions. Now we're just printing trillions, like that, of debt. Just
at the beginning of the pandemic, the Fed was giving out stats telling you how much they were printing. And once they got to like 60 billion or something, they just shut it off. They're like, we're not going to tell you anymore. And it was a huge scandal in 2008. It was unprecedented that they would do something like that. And then the interest rate, which is basically how they print money, was at zero or negative when you calculate in the time value of money. The way that the Federal Reserve was lending out money to banks was they were paying the banks to take the money because they were charging such a minuscule amount of interest that they were basically paying the banks to take the money because you could earn a better rate of return in anything. So anyways, this Ponzi scheme that they've had going since the Federal Reserve was created, basically in 1933, officially, it has to collapse eventually. And all currencies do. All fiat currencies do eventually collapse, unless they're, fiat currency means it's not backed by anything. If your coins are actually made out of silver, then it's hard for that.
What happened in Rome, right? Like in Rome, they had a gold coin, I believe, and they started to dilute it with other metals, and then basically over time, it's like barely any gold left, so it wasn't really gold anymore. It wasn't really the actual currency anymore, and then the empire eventually collapsed.
Yep, exactly. And there's a ton of predictive programming stuff to do with that. Tons of crazy parallels, and it has to do with Jan 6th and the crossing of the Rubicon with Caesar. But anyways, so basically the Cyber Polygon is the next move after that. So to answer the question of like how far the hyperinflation goes, they'll let it get pretty bad. The thing is, the rest of the world is going to be super fucked, and then the U.S. gets fucked last because we have some control over the world financial system.
So what comes out of that? What comes out of the cyber polygon financial system collapse?
So this is something that
CBDCs?
Yes, exactly. The Federal Reserve just released, it might have been the U.S. Treasury as well. I know the Treasury was talking about it during the pandemic. If you remember, they were already starting to prepare people for it by saying, oh, national coin shortage with the Fed, watch out. Don't touch the money. It might have coronavirus on it. Don't use money. So they've been preparing us for so long for that.
That one's super funny to me. Like, to me, I don't know how anyone can believe that, but I'm sure people have believed that they're going to get corona from touching the money.
Touching money, yeah. Don't get your money. It's a national coin shortage.
I mean, I don't touch change because it's annoying.
just toss that on the
Clean
ground.
bills are nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I've kind of been on the CBDC thing for a while, because back in like 2018, 2019, started researching crypto a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this is there's all this research from the Fed and the IMF and the World Bank and the Bank of International Settlements and stuff about how they're basically going to come out with this. And then liquidity is like the main thing that they start to talk about. I think XRP, or the technology that XRP is what is going to be utilized personally, based on everything I've researched. But
if they win that SEC deal, let's go. Or case, rather.
But because I was just trying to get rich, you know what I'm saying? I was just investing, and all the conspiracy stuff came up. But
it's honestly a huge part of mine.
Nick's aping shit coins based on what the conspiracies say.
But
it's not a bad strategy.
Sweet,
not a bad strategy, yeah.
But to
Just
me,
bet on
at the end of the
Klaus
day,
Schwab.
it's all about control for these people, and CBDC and whatever liquidity pool they want to use, and because that's where the narrative's going to go, because like everything's going to freeze up, right? To me, it's all about control, and it's all about how best they can control people. And like you were saying, it's an open ledger like Bitcoin is. So anyone can see every single transaction. They will see everything inside of your bank account, and they will know everything.
But unlike with
Bitcoin,
where anybody can see,
I hate Bitcoin anyway. But
with CBDC or central bank digital currencies, only they can see the ledger. So everybody else is out.
Exactly.
And now it's just one.
So when does Bitcoin go to zero?
I think the transition is going to be. I don't think it's going to be all or nothing. I think there's always going to be, because the problem is, yes, you could create, once everything goes into hyperinflation, yes, you could create a new central bank digital currency, but you're going to run into the same problem that caused the dollar to collapse in the first point. The reason the dollar is going to ultimately collapse is because when we went off a gold standard, we went on to what's referred to as the petrodollar, where we had OPEC agree to only sell their oil in U.S. dollars. So the biggest group of oil producers, if you wanted to buy oil, any country, you'd have to first buy U.S. dollars. So that means the U.S. was able to print free money, and we'd give it, in order to get our money that we printed for free, you would have to give us actual goods, services, resources. So that's what the U.S. empire was essentially built on.
And it's backed by our military.
Yeah. If you try to sell your oil in anything else, if you're Libya, Iraq was trying to sell their oil in euros right before we destroyed them. Libya was trying to start...
and they didn't have central banks there either, right? Those were like the countries without central banks are the ones we invaded.
Libya didn't. I don't think. Was it Iran that didn't? Not sure.
It's possible. I've heard different things as far as that. I think it could very well be, and it's definitely, if you're not participating in the dollar system and central banking system, then you're 100% a target, and you're not able to participate in global commerce. But that is basically the reason we went to so many of these wars. If you look at the real reason, for instance, Venezuela, I remember they were like ramping up for war with Venezuela, and we were supporting the rebels or whatever in the civil war. We're basically, doing a soft coup over there because they were originally in OPEC, Venezuela. Then they got off, nationalized their oil. Then we sanctioned them so that they couldn't make any money. Where all their money was coming from before just got cut off essentially. And so we've been doing complete warfare on anybody who sells their oil and not U.S. dollars will come after you and destroy you. And that's kind of what's going on with Russia as well. The reason Russia is such a threat is that they do supply energy to a huge portion of the rest of the modern world. But that's the big thing we were talking about earlier, de-dollarization. What's ultimately going to happen is China recently has stopped.
Can I mention something?
Yeah.
And I think that it's probably important to make the distinction between, we say we, right, like the United States, but it's really the people who control the United States and control the money supply and the Federal Reserve and those families, right? It's really them that are making these things happen because of their control over the dollar, not like the United States per se.
Correct, and the Federal Reserve is not. It's not a federal entity, and they have no reserves. And part of this documentary is it's basically going to be recreating this trip that me and Nick took across the country, and we visited Jekyll Island, which was the place that The Creature of Jekyll Island, great book, if you want to understand the Federal Reserve, is basically the place where these private bankers plotted the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, met there secretly, and basically they're not elected officials, and somehow they were able to create this entity and then have it come into power. They basically passed it, I believe in 1933, like a couple days, I think it was December 23rd, where most of Congress had left for Christmas, and they were able to just push it through. But yeah, exactly. It is a private entity, and it's those international bankers again, which involve the Rothschilds quite a bit. There's a few other players besides them, but yeah.
So I think the last kind of question that I have, because I don't want to kill you with just spitting bars right now. Is there anything that, people can do with some of this, like, esoteric knowledge or awareness to kind of counter anything? Like the people, like they use rhetoric or repetition or like these, hermetic principles, maybe like the duality or the programming or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Is there anything people can do with any sort of awareness with this to counteract or protect themselves from what's going on?
And additionally, why study stuff like this? Why be aware?
That's another great question. So really, it goes back to a lot of people, they talk about this concept of the black pill, where you look into so much stuff, you research it, and you find out about all these super powerful entities. You can see them clearly. You see Event 201 happening, and then they just do it in real life, and no one suspects them, even though they just told you this is what we're about to do, and they created the virus, and they made the solution. It's the exact same NIH. But anyways, people, they refer to it as the black pill, where you get like, you just get depressed because you're like, what can I do? I can't stop them. And yeah, so basically at the end of the day, with like the most productive thing to do with this knowledge, if you do, take the time to get it or whatever, is one, you got to really focus on yourself. So what we were talking about earlier, how you guys mentioned, it is good to know about it, but only so much as you can now make informed decisions. Like for instance, because people learned about the Federal Reserve, means specifically because I learned about the Federal Reserve in 2017, I was able to get into Bitcoin at 1,300, right before it like really took off. So that knowledge led me to actual physical, more freedom and tangible benefits in my life, because I knew enough about history to see where things were going, because I knew about the economic principles that they didn't teach me in my entire fucking 4-year fucking business degree. Which is
Drutang was able to time the market and make a killing on Bitcoin.
But yeah, no, so that's just one really good example of like why conspiracy theory knowledge will benefit you, and especially during Corona times and shit. If you were actually keeping up with it, you knew as a young person you had basically zero chance of any severe consequences of catching it, if you're healthy and whatever. But again, you have to be informed to know what your risk level is. Then you would know, for instance, I was just traveling the entire country at a discount, going wherever I want, empty everything, and fucking having a ball with no consequences because I knew the actual reality of the situation.
Yeah, same. I was in Brazil having a blast. Yeah, I think that it's also too, like, one thing I'll just say about that is if you have awareness of these things, you can not, like, to me, there's not much anyone can do, right? But if you are taking care of yourself and you find a way to, you know, you use this knowledge, you take care of your health, you take care of your finances, whatever, you do the best you can right now with what you have. I also think too that, you know, one of the biggest things I always think about is there's just so much more of us, like just normal, everyday, solid, good-hearted people who just want normalcy. And if you can, you know, present these things in a, and maybe like it never really works to kind of push these ideas on people, but if you're doing well and setting a good example, then like people will be kind of interested. And if you actually have tangible events to point them to and say, hey, don't you think like this happened actually, and here's the sort of proof of that, and then, you know, it kind of leads into this, don't you think? And you can actually like help people understand what's going on so that
they have to ask first, is what you're saying.
Yeah, they have to ask, but once they do, you know, you can kind of help get people on the same page.
And
to
people
where
are
it's
more likely to ask if you're someone worthy of like having that knowledge, or you appear and their perspective of you is like, oh, he's like doing good in life, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
So I think it comes back to what we kind of talk about all the time, is like just become as rich and dangerous as possible and just as valuable as possible as a person, and things start to get really good for you, and you can kind of use situations like this as a motivator almost, or a driver.
For sure. I had a banger tweet one time. It was like, do you ever think of the cabal's worst enemy while you're working out, or are you normal? It's a slapper.
That's fire. That's fire. Yeah, exactly. So the using it to intangible ways to benefit your own life, and then furthermore, to get to like the question of, can we use these same principles to cast a counterspell essentially and change the timeline, and using the same principles that they have used to program the masses to get them to accept certain scenarios, and obviously they don't have a great future planned for them. It's a what their future they have planned is
That's
essentially
super interesting.
Super ruling class. So that's essentially what Apocalypse DAO is. That's the project I'm working on. Is this documentary is going to use those same predictive programming principles, except in reverse, where we write a new ending. And it's like...
And it's all hard style, Ziz remixes.
Vegeta, hard step, hard style, EDM remix.
AR-15, heavy metal, like just, What's
Exactly.
the actual outcome?
So yeah.
I interrupt. I had to.
No, I
wanted. There was another point in the pod too where I was.
Involved.
You said something about, I don't even know what it was, but I just felt so. I didn't, but I felt so strongly to just interject and like they'll do it until they'll try to do it, but a group of high seas pirates will reign supreme.
Exactly.
Rebel
It goes with the whole duality aspect, is that there's always, throughout history, there's always an advancement towards, the trend has always been towards higher levels of decentralization. So like the printing press, and this kind of goes into astrology as well, which another one of my better predictions was, I was talking about in 2019, I kept tweeting about this astrological event called Saturn conjunct Pluto in Capricorn. And this event the last time it happened was 700 or so years ago during the Protestant Reformation, where there was the printing press, the Bible was translated out of Latin, and there was a huge decentralization of information that led to the Renaissance. That same event happened January 12th, 2020, and I had been talking about it a bunch before it happened, and then
And we got TikTok.
9 days later, the first case of coronavirus was discovered in the U.S., and that started. I don't think anyone would disagree that we live in a much different world 2 years later after that event
100%
than before.
Everything is much more online, like just everything, like the internet. That was like the flipping point. Like the internet is more real life than real life, I think, and it still is.
And it will be. The metaverses.
Yeah, and again, there's always another interesting thing to think about is like oh, there's this, it's what a dark future, blah, blah, blah. Really, you think about what happened with the pandemic, again, like, yes, a lot of people had their businesses harmed. There's people that, went to the hospital and got fucking remdesivir injected and died. Just fucking little Fauci's little... Anyways, a whole different subject. But anyway, so if you're informed, you can always find advantages in each situation. There's a constant duality. There's never truly... Sometimes it'll look more dark than light, etc. But you got to think... there's always an advantage that you can take in each situation, which is important to remember so you don't get black-pilled. You just got to, again, try and find ways to actually implement the information.
For sure. I think this is a great place to kind of transition into how I want to end the podcast, and that's with naming events or certain things that kind of happen throughout history chronologically, and just getting a 1 or 2 sentence response. From you. And perfect. I think, Logan, I'll wait for you to get water.
Yeah.
Maybe bring the water back here. I'll take some.
Here, let me take a piss real quick, too.
Pause.
Unpause. We're back.
Yeah, unpause. I want to kind of name just a couple maybe events or people or things throughout history chronologically.
Okay.
Probably starting with Jesus Christ.
Okay.
And I just want a couple sentences off the top of your head on each of them about what you think and your...
What it is, what they mean.
And your random knowledge that no one else that is watching normal YouTube is going to know. Okay. So, Jesus Christ, first one.
Fire first event. So basically, there's a couple of real interesting things about, regardless of the story of the life of Jesus, etc. I think what's really interesting to me is the symbols that the Roman Catholic Church put on top of the story that basically formed the symbolism of the church, etc. Like, for instance, the way that Jesus is depicted in these, our earliest depictions of him represent, or they're similar to this other Roman god that was popular at the time called Mithras. And he was worshipped in the catacombs. He was worshipped underground. And that's how the early Christians were also forced to worship underground to avoid persecution. So there's some interesting connections there. I think also there's a lot of solar symbolism in the way that the Roman Catholic Church presents Christianity. For instance, Christmas was originally on January 7th. And if you have any friends that are in the Greek Orthodox Church, to this day, they still celebrate Christmas on January 7th. And that basically, like the timing of Christmas, it's basically like, for instance, December 25th, like it's the day that it's basically when the sun starts getting bigger in the sky every day. Mm-hmm. So, it's basically winter equinox or whatever, and then
the sun is born.
The sun is born, yeah.
It's getting bigger. Mm-hmm. Think about it.
Thank you.
So, and there's also a bunch of stuff like the Romans, they had Sol Invictus, their solar god, shared a bunch of symbolism. That was like their main Helios. That was like their main, I think even Constantine, which was the Roman emperor in 300 AD that actually made Christianity the national religion of the empire. He previously had in like his coins that he printed. On the flip side, he had Sol Invictus. So there's all these connections between this solar deity, and then they kind of took all that symbolism. Like you always see Jesus with the halo, or like the solar disk behind him. And that, again, it goes back to, so there's Sol Invictus, Helios. Those are actually Greek gods that the Romans took. But where did the Greeks get their pantheon of gods was the Egyptians. So it goes back to Horus, and which was the sun god. And Horus was resurrected. He was a resurrected god that basically was resurrected from Osiris. Yeah, so there's all this very interesting stuff as far as like rebranding older religions, and that kind of goes back to our original concept of all these thought systems are basically just
The same.
slightly rebranded from ancient Egypt. Yeah. And ancient Egypt itself, Plato says in Plato's works Timaeus and Critias, where we get the stories of Atlantis, he says that the Egyptian priest told his ancestor Solon that Egypt was actually a colony of Atlantis. So all the ancient wisdom we get from Egypt, which is then rebranded throughout history, is actually even older from Atlantis.
Which is exactly why I put the pyramids in my Atlantis shirt. Think about it.
Fire.
Yeah.
Ancient Egypt, the pyramids, and are they electrical generators?
Very possibly. So just to start off, the most interesting parts about the pyramid. One second.
Got it? Oh, I was just gonna leave it there.
Okay. So pyramids. So we're talking about like astrology and stuff, and how important it is in these ancient religions. For instance, this is one thing I meant to say about the Jesus thing is, the fish symbol used for Jesus to like Christianity. That's also the sign of Pisces, and that's the age we've been in for the last 2,000 years.
And now we're in Aquarius.
So we're transitioning into Aquarius. So basically, they came up, or they started to promote this religion, Christianity, with the symbol of Pisces right at the Piscean age, 2,000 years ago. So these ages are approximately 2,100 years apiece.
And now we have Aquarius, which will be the re-rise of Atlantis.
The water
Think
bearer,
about
the knowledge bearer. But the pyramids themselves, interestingly enough, mainstream science says they're built like, I think it's like 6,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, I forget exactly when, which is complete bullshit. You can't carbon date rock, so we have no idea when this shit went up. We have and there's no hieroglyphics describing when the pyramids were built whatsoever. So there is no actual hard evidence whatsoever. What's interesting though is the pyramids, they are arranged in a way that mimics a constellation known as Orion's Belt. And 13,000 years ago, they would have been directly underneath Orion's Belt in the night sky. So whether or not they were built 13,000 years ago, it's clear that whoever built them, that was their message. They were trying to point to that age to tell you something. And the Sphinx, the other major megalithic structure, obviously a lion, it would have been facing I believe it would be the summer equinox. It would be directly facing the summer equinox, again, 13,000 years ago. And there was some interesting research done on the enclosure of the Sphinx, where it has water erosion patterns that would have only formed in the climate that ancient Egypt had 13,000 years ago. So it all points back to the age of Leo, which is going back to Plato's account of Atlantis and Critias and Timaeus. He says he somehow accurately dates the fall of Atlantis to 9,000 years ago, the flood that wiped out Atlantis. He dates it 9,000 years before his ancestors' time, which would be basically works out to 11,600 years ago from now. And that, in the geological record, again, this is hard evidence we have, there was a event called, I believe it was like Glacier Melt B or something like that, during this age called the Younger Dryas period. Essentially, the North American ice cap started melting rapidly, and it rose global sea levels 200 feet. Majorly changed the face of the earth completely. Yep. And yeah, so I think that's the... and also, so you're saying power generation? Nikola Tesla, who was, created AC power, radio, etc. So basically everything, like all these modern inventions we have, like we're still using AC power. We really haven't done any better than what he came up with. one of his last projects, the last project that he had funded by JP Morgan was this power tower that he originally told him was a new long-range wireless transmitter for information, like radio. The actual purpose of it was to create a network of free wireless energy using the Earth's magnetic field. He could transmit energy wirelessly. Like, we have information we can send wirelessly.
You can send energy.
Even wireless charging, you have to have a direct contact. What he had was long distance wireless energy transfer. And once JP Morgan found out about that, because basically, again, all of the American empire is built on oil. Like we talked about earlier, the petrodollar, obviously they couldn't have that. So he got defunded, wiped out. He never got another project funded again. So who knows, for the last 20 or so years of his life, he had all these inventions that never got any attention, which he actually, during World War I, he came up with this death ray, which he was trying to sell to governments as a way to end the war, which is pretty hilarious.
Didn't Trump's uncle get Nikola Tesla's documents?
Yes. Yep.
And
Dr. John Trump.
Wasn't Prescott Bush the father of George H.W. and then Prescott was Nikola Tesla's associate or something? And he was connected to the American Nazis or
yeah,
whatever?
Prescott 100% connected to the American Nazis. He founded the Union Bank with the Harriman brothers that they used to fund the building of the Nazi headquarters, among other things. Basically, they set up the whole Nazi party. There is some interesting stuff about the Bushes working for Tesla. Again, it was one of those things where I looked into and couldn't find enough to to really get to my seal of approval type receipts. But there is some interesting stuff about that. Also with the Bushes, there is another clear connection. The whole reason the Bush family even had any wealth to begin with is they worked for the Buckeye Steel Company for the Rockefellers, which is basically how they got their start.
I think that's a good one on Egypt and pyramids.
yeah, that should do it.
This one is a little bit random, and then I want to go to more actual U.S. moments, but the Library of Alexandria and Alexander the Great.
That's a great one. That's something that during the pandemic, a lot of my research was revolving around eugenics and industrial, Gilded Age America and Nazis, etc. But more recently, I've really been focusing on more Rome and Greece. So Alexander the Great, he's only a few generations removed from, I think it was Aristotle was his direct mentor, I think is the lore. So these great Greek philosophers, Solon, Plato, Pythagoras, it was only a few generations it took that knowledge, which they were educated in Egypt. It only took a few generations of that tutorship, that apprenticeship, until Alexander the Great pops up and takes over the majority of the known world at that time by the age of 23. And he basically...
I gotta go way harder.
Exactly. Caesar, I think, even said that, too. Caesar was at age 23, Alexander had conquered twice as much as I have. So, yeah, Alexander was just absolutely insane what he accomplished, although I'm pretty sure he was banging dudes, but, whatever. It's ancient Greece, Macedonia, etc. So they were kind of into that shit back then. But yeah, no, he did some good shit. He did some good shit. And really what, we're talking about, again, all this ancient Egyptian knowledge that actually,
and the knowledge in the
Atlantis.
Library of Alexandria that might have been lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Atlantis, that even more ancient civilization, Egypt being a colony of it, that would mean that the Library of Alexandria would have held information that would be from Atlantis, which would, if we lost it, it would have been because the burning of the Library of Alexandria, so it was a great storehouse of knowledge in the ancient world. It was destroyed in the Roman Civil War in I believe it was 49 BC was when the Roman Civil War started, which actually started January 7th, 49 BC, when Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon after he had been voted out of power by the Roman Senate on January 7th, which was the same date that Trump was voted out of power. But it would have been Jan 6th if not for the insurrection. So again, I talk about like false flags and pushing stuff back and connections between the two empires, because that was the falling of the Roman Republic before it was a republic. After the Caesar and the Civil War, it didn't immediately become an empire. He was they didn't give him the title emperor, but basically after that, that's why they call all the emperors Caesar after it. But to get to the burning of the library, there is some evidence that it wasn't necessarily, it was like supposedly accidental, and then there's also some information that maybe they were able to move it. Really, there was more destruction of information in 300 AD during when Constantine made Christianity the national religion of Rome. There was a secondary library close by, and that was burned down. And that's when, because they were destroying any evidence of other mystical arts, it was basically they were monopolizing information.
Gotcha.
To where there was a broader, in Alexandria, it was always a mixing of cultures and information. That's when they really started to shut it down, was the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire, like that transition. Just one last thing, evidence that there was ancient Atlantean information in the Library of Alexandria. There's this map known as the Perry-Reese map, which was basically, the map itself was made by a Turkish guy in Constantinople, which is, it was actually, we call it the Roman Catholic Church, but actually Constantine made Christianity the national religion in Constantinople, which is in Turkey, now Istanbul. But basically, a guy in the 1500s, this general made this map, but said, Perry Reese, he says he based it off of an older map material, and that being the new center of information, once they burned down the secondary Library of Alexandria, they would have taken all the good shit to Constantinople. That Perry Reese map, the crazy part about it is it shows the coast of Antarctica without any ice. And they claim that Antarctica has been covered with ice for millions of years, and some part of it might have been. Yep. But there's other parts of recorded history where it was possible that Antarctica, and mind you, Antarctica wouldn't actually be discovered until 1800s, as far as we know, recorded or mainstream history. But it indicates that at one point, Antarctica didn't have ice on it, which the earliest would have been 8,000 years ago or something like that. So a ridiculously long amount of time ago. And that's actual proof of it. Perry Reese map would be proof that there was Atlantean knowledge, even pre-Egypt knowledge in the Library of Alexandria.
Got you. That's crazy. Quick note before I just go on to the next one. I don't know how you have all this shit in your head. It's crazy. 1776.
Okay, so what we had just talked about with the whole barbarian Illuminati thing, and especially talking about duality, how there's always an equal amount of good and evil, good-minded people that want the best for humanity, and then people who are selfish and want to centralize power. 1776, obviously when the Declaration of Independence was written, which was, again, we're talking about how history skews towards decentralization of information and therefore power, was a huge step, even during, especially you can see it now during the pandemic, the differences between the rights that Americans were able to hold on to compared to Commonwealth countries that didn't fight for independence, like Canada and Australia. Where Australia, they just passed a thing where they can force vaccinate you. They already built the quarantine camps, insane shit over there. But anyways, across the world, back in the old world, that's the new world, US, back in the old world, the Bavarian Illuminati was founded in the same year with their goal to centralize power completely. And we're kind of seeing that still play out. Of course, I think it's at least 9 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. And then we had Ben Franklin, who I don't believe he signed the Declaration, oddly enough, but he was a part of all types of esoteric cults, like, for instance, the Hellfire Club, which I think they just use that in Stranger Things. I think they just had a club called the Hellfire Club in there. Probably, again, some more predictive programming type shit. But actually, that whole Stranger Things side note is based off of the Montauk Project, which is like in a gray zone of if it was real, but there is a real program that was experimenting with like human supernatural abilities called Project Stargate. All right, that's the side note. Anyway, so yeah, Ben Franklin was, the Hellfire Club had like crazy orgies and shit. He was a real wild guy, but pretty smart, obviously. But I think that's all.
How many chicks does it take to turn on the light bulb? Apparently a lot.
Well, how could you sum up 1776?
So I think it was the year that the actual, like, the New World Order plan that we're seeing play out right now, which the concept of a New World Order is that it's actually based on a new Atlantis. There's this guy, Francis Bacon, a British wizard. He was he was an occultist. He not only translated the Bible, he was the final editor of the King James Bible. This is the first English translation of the Bible. He also probably wrote all of Shakespeare. And by him writing all of Shakespeare, what I mean is there was a group of occultists, Rosicrucians, who translated all these ancient stories and then they put it into English. And basically because of Shakespeare and the King James Bible, that's what gave the English language like dominance over Latin. And that's basically what asserted dominance of it compared to the Latin Roman Empire, Holy Roman Empire. So I would say 1776 was basically the defining moment, or the defining year of where we are now, where we built up the New World Order in the New World, America, and the Old World Illuminati is still trying to assert control. And there is going to be, I think we're clashing right now between the two concepts of like American nationalism and globalism. Is obviously like, it's basically the forefront of everything if we're talking about the World Economic Forum and stuff. But I think it's really everything that we see playing out right now originated in 1776. Both of the two major organizations that were fighting, one for freedom and decentralization of power, and then, which is, the American Constitution, Declaration of Independence. And then we have the Bavarian Illuminati, which is centralization and control.
For sure. 1913.
So 1913, the year that the Federal Reserve was secretly plotted on Jekyll Island in Georgia, which you can go to. It's actually a really nice place. Just went there for the second time. Really crazy ass. The island itself is nuts. Like, for those who are already familiar with it, obviously it's where they plotted the Federal Reserve. It was basically like Epstein's Island before Epstein's Island. So there was no bridge. You could only get there by boat. It was the super powerful. We're talking Carnegie, Rockefeller, basically all these captains of industry. They were J.P. Morgan. They were the only ones that had cottages there, and their cottages are still up. They did a classic like, people probably aren't gonna like this as like a historical thing. Let's give it to the state and make it like a little like state park type deal. So people have like weddings there and shit. But anyways, when we were there recently, some fun side notes, because everybody knows the Federal Reserve stuff. Fun side notes. What we found out when we got there was the Native Americans that were on Jekyll Island originally, they were this owl chaos god worshippers, and they were giants. So it was like 6 feet plus. These motherfuckers that lived there before. 6 feet plus, like 7, fucking 6-7 feet tall, like just huge for anyone at that time.
Okay.
And actually, it could be bigger. I'm just going again like lowballing it so I don't end up being super wrong. But they're way outside of the average for that time at the very least. They were described as giants, and you can see in the depictions. And guess who were the first people to colonize that island was? Can you guess? Can you guess who the missionaries were? What group they were a part of?
The Jesuits.
The Jesuits. Yeah, they were the first ones there. And the Rockefeller House, who obviously Rockefeller's most dominant American industrial family, who shaped the whole world, helped fund the Nazis, taught them eugenics. The Rockefeller House is not, all the other cabins are called like Carnegie Cabin, like Carnegie Cottage, clubhouse, something like that. The Rockefeller House is just referred to as the Indian Mound House. So but the thing is, they don't tell you, hey, what's in the mound? And what's in the mound is a child. It was where they were sacrificing children. It was their child sacrifice mound. So they sacrifice the kids, then they bury them in the mound. So Rockefeller built the house on it and then called it Indian Mound. And he has blood red floors. They're all just the classic, like if you've seen Eyes Wide Shut, which was Stanley Kubrick's movie that he was killed before he completed it, which was basically telling the story of the Bush family and Skull and Bones, among other things. But it was actually shot in a Rothschild's house. Highly recommend that movie. So it's even like worse than you think. Like it's like, oh, they just secretly plotted the Federal Reserve there to take over the entire U.S. banking system and the globe. Basically stole the entire country. And then they also made income tax at the same time. Before then, there was no income tax.
Nice. 2 scams for one.
Yeah, both integral in the control. There's 1913.
Amazing. Logan, do you have any? Do you want to throw out? Because I got 1 or 2 more.
How about World War II?
Oh, well, yeah, that's a fun one. So basically, there's so many crazy things about the world wars. Like World War I was basically started, like the reason the U.S. got involved with it was a false flag. It was the sinking of I think it was called like the Lithuania or some shit like that, some dumbass name. But it was basically, they're like, oh, the Germans just sunk this British boat. It's time to start World War I, or get the U.S. involved, whatever, because there was U.S. passengers.
World War II?
Oh, so I'm just setting up the World War I going to World War II, just showing how it's all
What was like
scammed.
the Franz Ferdinand thing?
So yeah, Archduke Ferdinand, he was assassinated,
and then it started the whole thing.
That kind of, yeah. That's the official. That's
fake,
how it
right?
started. No, that's how it started. And I haven't really looked into that too much.
Right?
But that's how we got into. That's how we got into the war, was the sinking of this British boat that had American citizens on it. But there's evidence that the British were talking about it. There's like letters, documents of them talking about the ship sinking before it sank. So they were like, it was an obvious plot to bring in the United States. And the interesting thing about World War I was that and I'm only talking about this because World War I is basically set up World War II. There wouldn't have been a Nazi Germany without World War I. Basically, World War I was over. Like, the Germans had complete dominance, strongest military. They blew everybody out of the water. It was already over. And they were ready the Germans were offering peace and saying, not only peace, but saying, all right, let's just put everything back to the way it was before the war. Like, we're good. We'll just, you guys can keep your countries, whatever. But then the Rothschilds because of their influence in the United States, they had a few cutouts in Kuhnenlobe and the National Bank. They had some of their some of their employees went over to the U.S., founded very powerful banks there, and then had set up the Federal Reserve, put in the income tax, and they're like, okay, we have control over the U.S. We can bring in the United States and win the war for the United Kingdom, but we need you guys to give us Israel. We need the British people to give the Rothschilds and the Zionists, which Zionists are not, they don't have to be Jewish, like Trump's a Zionist. It's basically anybody who wants to retake the Holy Land for the Jewish people, or really, I guess, if they're, for themselves, for the West, I guess. It all goes back to the Crusades and the Templars, and really involves Solomon's Temple as well. But they wrote this Balfour Declaration, which was actually written by the Rothschilds. It's addressed to the Rothschilds, but they basically wrote it and then gave it to the guy to sign, Lord Balfour. He signs it, gives them control over Israel, basically, which they had no authority to do. And then they bring in, through the banking interests, they bring in the United States to fight World War I, destroy the Germans, destroy their economy, and then charge them reparations in such an oppressive amount, which is basically, they're like, okay, pay us back for all the damages during World War I. Mm-hmm. They crush the German economy, absolutely destroy it. The Deutschmark goes hyperinflation, and you have wheelbarrows. Like this is the most famous example of hyperinflation, where people are like taking wheelbarrows down to buy a loaf of bread. They're like burning the money to stay warm. So they basically collapsed the German economy. Then the American industrialist, Rockefeller, Henry Ford, they come over and they start take control out of all the natural resources and start building their own factories. The Rockefellers take over all their chemical industries and oil and stuff like that. They form this, they consolidate all their chemical companies into this entity known as IG Farben. And there's a quote by Senator Homer T. Bone in like a World War II. After World War II, they had committees to investigate American industrialist involvement with the Nazis. And basically he says, this Senator Homer T. Bone, he goes, great name, by the way. He goes, IG Farben was Hitler and Hitler was Farben. So basically through this massive chemical entity they put together, with the help of the U.S. bankers and Wall Street, they basically took over the entire German economy, and then the government they basically chose Hitler. There's letters that go back to the Rockefellers propagandist who basically invented public relations. His name is Ivy Lee, and Ivy Lee was exposed as helping the Nazis and having a contract with them for $33,000. That's in like the New York Times. You can look up the article. And basically he groomed and created Hitler's cult of personality in Germany. So they build up the Nazis. They have a false flag called the Reichstag fire, where they have the German parliament, or the German, I think it was a parliament, but it's the German government building, the main German government building. They have it catch fire one night, and they blame it on one communist, which could have been, maybe not, I don't know. But they use that burning of their Capitol building, think Jan 6, and if you look at the pictures with like the smoke bombs going off in the Capitol, like side to side next to the Reichstag fire, very similar. They use it to pass the Reichstag fire decrees. And basically that allows the German government to crack down on all journalists, to take care of any political enemies, imprison them, and give them the full dictator-like control over the country, which then they use to obviously essentially start World War II. And actually, they were, again, it has a lot to do with Israel as well, because what's not really known is that the first settlements in Israel were actually Germans. It's called the Templar Society. And anyways, World War II. Oh, yeah, so like I said, it's a ton of the Americans were actually the ones behind a lot of the German war machine. For instance, Henry Ford was building, he had a tank factory over there. After the war, he sued the U.S. government for bombing his Nazi tank factory, and he won. The government compensated him.
So he was building tanks over here for the U.S. military.
Yeah.
And he was over there building tanks for the German military.
Yeah. And so basically the industrialists profited on both sides. And there's actually...
It's a great high ticket offer.
That's like, yeah.
Great high ticket offer.
There's actually some pieces, like people think that, oh, everybody during World War II, they all just like were so hyped to go fight another world war because the Nazis were so bad and they everybody knew and they all wanted to go and
Sounds like it was just a get rich quick scheme.
Yep.
On a mass scale.
And it was consolidating power. Ultimately, you destroy the old world over and over and over again. And what happened as a result? Then we went into the Cold War where there's two superpowers, U.S. versus Russia, with the nuclear bomb as like a deterrent. We go into the Cold War era. And then eventually Russia collapses. And now we have, to our current day, the one global superpower, the U.S. And basically that was their plan the whole time, though, going back to Francis Bacon, that British magician that basically started colonialism and encouraged it to the Queen, and like basically got all of, got the whole nation behind colonialism and taking over the New World. He wanted to start a new Atlantis, and that what we've seen with the U.S. as the one global superpower, this is the new Atlantis. They succeeded in it.
Do you think we have, based on all this old knowledge and stuff that might have been lost and whatnot that we've talked about, do you think we have more advanced technology than they had?
I think we have different technology. I think it's like, and it's hard to tell too because we forget how quickly nature takes back everything, especially if you have massive flooding. Like water will just destroy everything. It's estimated now if there was major cataclysms, the only thing that would be existing after a couple of thousand years would be the Hoover Dam. That would be the only thing that humanity has created that would last more than a couple thousand years. So it's hard to tell if they had some type of, similar skyscraper shit like this, because if there's any type of flooding, Miami's gone like that. But what the only evidence that we have of what's left behind is, and the only thing we can actually prove, I was talking about you can't carbon date the stones of the pyramid. The only thing we have to prove that there was even a civilization back 12,000 years ago, before that flood, was another place in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe, which means pot-bellied hill. Which was basically the only reason we know this huge. It's actually the biggest megalithic stone civilization we've ever found, or monument we've ever found. It goes on it's huge, but massive, huge. I think they're probably 20-foot tall, stone T-beams, and they have hieroglyphics on them that match stuff that's both in Sumeria, in Iran, Iraq, and also in South America, where there's also megalithic stone structures. But the only reason we can carbon date it is because it was purposely buried, and we can carbon date the ground and the other artifacts that are in there. So somebody purposely buried that before the flood, and then that is the only evidence we actually have of their being a previous civilization.
But in your opinion, do you think they had as advanced technology?
I think they might have. I think they might have been more advanced themselves. I think there might have been more of they had more control over their natural abilities, to the point where it's
they could fly. Could they fly?
I don't know about flying. I think there's a possibility that that they had. If I did have to say what type of technology they would have, there's a lot of really interesting stuff with sound, sound levitation. You can.
That's how they may have built the pyramids.
Yeah. Also, they were probably giants as well, but that's a whole different subject. But yeah, it was a combination of them being giants and then
that woolly mammoth liver was hitting, dog.
It's a new Sobra product.
So I think my last thing before we kind of wrap this up, because we've been going for a while.
Yeah, I'm tired of sitting here, to be honest.
And I feel like we could be talking. We could go on for another 5 hours based on everything that's going on here. Mm-hmm. But we'll probably end it here. Donald Trump and the birth of Donald Trump and the dates and the symbolism and all that.
Oh, perfect.
Because like 777 and all those different the days and
in the book, right?
Yeah, in the book, like the Baron Trump book, and all that stuff. I want to know what you know about all that.
So this goes to really at the core of the Apocalypse Now documentary, and basically what the main message in the ritual that me and Nick had come to the conclusion that it's like probably the most important and like really gives the most clear description of what's happening and what's going to happen is it's this book by Aleister Crowley, another British magician called the Moonchild.
And they did like a ritual, right?
Yes, it was called the Babylon Working, and it was done in the Mojave Desert in 1946, in January to March of 1946 by Marvel, Jack Parsons. For Jack Parsons, he created liquid rocket fuel. He is literally the reason that we have rockets. Okay. He created. He was also.
Did we go to the moon, by the way?
That's a really great question. We'll get to that in a sec.
Keep interrupting him on things you're asking him.
My bad. I just get excited.
So he is the reason we went to the moon, and that ties in with this Moonchild ritual and that ties into JFK as well. But so anyways, him and L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, which controls some of the most powerful people in Hollywood to this day, and Hollywood refers to the wood that they made the wands out of in ancient pre-Roman Great Britain. That was the civilization that ruled that island before the Romans moved in, and there were wizards called Druids, D-R-U-I-D. And they made their wands out of Hollywood. So we're talking about like casting spells over the population in order to manifest the timeline you want. That's the purpose of television programming, movie programming. But
wands are real?
I think so. I mean, I don't know. I don't know exactly. I think it's more of like a phallus type. It's like an homage to dicks, which obelisks and rockets actually are also. Because that was the final thing, is Jack Parsons was also a sex magician. So this ritual he was doing was basically involved a lot of sodomy. But so anyways, yeah. So him, L. Ron Hubbard was there. L. Ron Hubbard was the one taping it. And he would later go on to rob Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons would blow up in his home lab, whatever. But basically all of Marvel, the Marvel comic series, all refers to Marvel Jack Parsons. It's all a part. It's, we're talking about Hollywood being spells.
Yep.
It's all a spell based off of to bring about this Moonchild ritual, which is basically it's the leader for a new aeon. So they were trying to bring about this. The actual book Moonchild, written by Aleister Crowley, is about a sect of light magicians battling a sect of dark magicians over the birth of a savior, like super powerful leader, which is, if you notice, that's the exact plotline of Harry Potter, Star Wars. It's literally the exact, both of those series isn't
it like Iron Man too?
Yes. And and it ends up being the Marvel series, the character in the Marvel series that they base off, because Jack Parsons he had a very distinct look. Crazy dark mustache, like slick back hair. He was a wild looking ass dude. And they based Iron Man, Tony Stark's father, Howard Stark, who not only creates Iron Man, but he also creates Captain America through scientific experiments. In the show, in the movie series, they based it off of Jack Parsons. So to get to the Trump part, so what I'm trying to say is the Moonchild ultimately we were talking about Jesus and the sun symbolism. So Jesus represents the divinity of man, the ultimate connection with God, and the full potential of natural humanity. And the Moonchild, so he's the son of God. The Moonchild would then represent complete artificial human through physical alterations, transhumanism, merging with machine, and science, putting your faith in science instead of in God, is what the Moonchild represents. So you have Captain America, who is there. Who's the he represents the American Empire. Basically based on like a Christian empire, essentially. But he's the ultimate expression of humankind. He was the first Avenger, is what they call the first movie. And Iron Man, also a creation of Howard Stark, aka Jack Parsons. He's the ultimate expression of technology, leading to the highest form of human being. And this is a concept that Nietzsche talked about, the Übermensch, which is basically Superman. Superman. So yeah, and that's Superman. Basically, that same duality there. If you notice that same duality there, of the ultimate human potential versus artificial. It's the exact same thing in the DC universe. Superman and Batman, exact same thing. But so all of that is programming the population, because those by far are more than the stories of the Bible. The people, if you go and ask anybody, characters from the Bible or characters from Marvel, they're going to know the characters from Marvel a million times more. So it is a new...
All the fucking atheists on Reddit.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It is exactly their target audience. So you form this new civilization, because after World War II, when they were doing the Babylon working and the Moonchild ritual, it was when America was, moving away from Christianity and religion as the core programming that made us into a single civilization. They replaced it essentially with all of this Hollywood stuff, using technology, using rockets especially. This goes into my thread that basically all the obelisks, the ancient Egyptian obelisks, those all represent Osiris's dick. So, I was talking about the solar god Horus, who was resurrected. He was a resurrection of Osiris.
What's with all the gay shit?
It's mainly just about dicks. It's a lot about dicks. The phallus is like hugely important in all this. Like the wand, it's all sex magic, because ultimately that's the most powerful. Think of the most powerful thing a human being can do. What can we do? You can create a whole nother ass human using your dick.
And they do it through magic.
Drutang just dropped a sex magic.
New sex magic course. Hit me up. But yeah, so to get to the Trump thing though, so Trump, you're talking about 777. He did become president when he was like 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old. And like you mentioned before, also his uncle, Dr. John Trump, was the person the FBI gave all of Nikola Tesla's research to after he died. Which Nikola Tesla died on January 7th as well, same day as Trump was voted out of power, and the same day that Caesar was voted out of power. So, which was originally Christmas. But so Tesla. So John Trump. So yeah. So technically, you could think, okay, well, anything that Tesla had, then John Trump would have, and then his nephew becomes president.
And president would probably have it.
The first ever person to become president without Reagan kind of was, but Trump was such an outlier out of anybody else who had ever become president. Completely different approach. He randomly becomes president. So you think then there's some also crazy other predictive programming stuff, which you brought up. Books written in 1899, I think it's like 1897, 1899 or something, by this guy Ingersoll Lockwood. he wrote 2 books, or he wrote a couple of books, but 2 books specifically. He wrote Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey and the sequel, The Last President. So, and The Last President has, he has like a Pence character, or actually Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey has a Don character. They have a Pence character. There's all types of crazy like similarities. I think it's about going to the center of the earth in Russia through a sinkhole in Russia. I've never actually read them in depth, but The Last President is the second one, and it's basically about a very similar Trump figure who's part of the ruling class, wealthy, but knows how to talk to the common man. When he gets elected, there's riots he lives on Fifth Avenue in New York, which is right where Trump Tower is. There's riots, anti-communist riots when he wins. And then the movie ends, they talk about predictive programming, it ends with the White House blowing up, and it's the end of the Republic. So in the same way that Caesar and the Jan 7th getting voted out of power effectively ended the Roman Republic and led to the form of the empire, that's kind of it's the same motif being played out in those books. And you're like, okay, well, how the fuck did Trump come up with all this shit? You look to the Marvel movies. So we got to wrap this up. But so in the Marvel movies, in Endgame, they basically defeat Thanos, aka Bill Gates, depopulation. They defeat him by time traveling. And Captain America specifically has to go back in time, and like he's the one who like mainly like gets sacrificed through the time traveling. Long story short, there is a whistleblower that says he was a part of a time-traveling DARPA project, much like we were talking about with Looking Glass. And he claims that it was based off of the Tesla information that John Trump got.
And Donald is a time traveler.
Quite possibly. There's a lot. If anybody in the world is a time traveler, he's the one person who would have access to that information.
Interesting.
And then Elon is the Moonchild, right?
Yeah. So Elon is set up. Werner von Braun, the Nazi scientist that we brought over after World War II and basically ran NASA, he wrote a book called The Mars Project in 1953. And in that book, he says it's a book about a human colony on Mars. And he says the title of the leader of the colony on Mars, the title given to him, will be Elon. In the same way that all the emperors after Caesar were referred to as Caesar, it's the same thing where it's like a title like that. Elon's family also is the reason he's from South America or South Africa was because his grandfather was kicked out of Canada because he was leading this group called the Technocracy Party, which is basically the idea of we don't need democracy. We're just going to have a group of experts, aka billionaires, Bill Gates, fucking Musk, control the whole world because they're so special and they deserve it. Which is basically Avengers. They're superheroes. And yeah, I think that's about it. And my fiance is calling. I think she's off of work and
for sure
needs to be let into the apartment.
Yeah, that was. I think we could keep going, but we're not.
Yeah,
we've been sitting here for a while.
I can't sit here anymore.
Sitting here for a while.
Even though the information is great, if I was standing, I would love it.
I think this is. We've never gone this deep. I mean, our conspiracy pod was not this deep.
We just don't know any of this shit.
Yeah. This is super interesting to me. If you guys want to see a sequel, another round 2 of where we just go even deeper, tell us in the comments. If not, if you don't say, then we'll know you don't want more. But is there any last notes you want to leave for the associates of the associates while you're here on the official Associates podcast?
So I'd say, obviously follow me on Twitter. I'm gonna be dropping pretty much my magnum opus thread that's gonna summarize essentially everything we were talking about in like one coherent message. And then stand by for the documentary. I'm going to applications for Apocalypse DAO are closed right now, but we'll be taking some more people. I think another 70 people in a week or so. So yeah, just if you're interested in possibly the group, and basically we're doing there's a course. So basically to train the cult. I'm releasing this course, 22-part course that will go in depth on everything, subjects that we were talking about, and then leading up to what I think is the most logical future timeline, and then talking about how we can possibly like we were talking about, possibly use their same concepts of magic and programming to influence
take
it
back the world
and make things better.
Yeah, go check out Drutang. Go read his already posted threads. They're great. They go super in depth.
And go check out the pod on all platforms at Associates Pod. I think we're about to be on Twitter too. TikTokers still hate us. They're gonna hate this episode too. And that's it. Episode 14 is done.